it brings up the next topic that I want to touch on, because not surprisingly, in both of the consults last night, I gave feedback to the two people who presented about efforting, and again, I want to say that this dynamic is a universal dynamic, as I've shared this with you before. At least universal in I haven't had the experience yet of teaching in East Asia, for example, so I don't know how it might be in non-Western cultures, but in all of the Western cultures that I teach in, this theme of efforting is everywhere. I mean, it seems like some really very basic cultural dynamic. And obviously, just to remind you, we can effort around on a behavioral level. In other words, we can force ourselves to run. We can force ourselves to, for a while anyway, if you're forcing yourself. It doesn't last for too long, but we can use the will for certain kinds of things. But will and efforting, we can't make ourselves love somebody. We can't make ourselves have an orgasm. We can't make ourselves, what else? We can't make ourselves forgive. That's a very good point. That's not subject to the personal will. And so all of these things can happen, as we know, fortunately, but when we start willing, it actually tends to abort the process. And this subtle, sometimes very obvious, but this strong tendency to get goal-oriented, which is often, it is so profoundly ego and culturally syntonic for us that it's so easy for all of us to fall into that trap of becoming goal-oriented, and the efforting is part of that goal orientation. And so again, I don't want anybody to feel bad about this, when we point this out, because this is a regular thing. This is something that I think just about every therapist deals with in one way or another. So the alternative is a very deep faith in the process, and a confidence that when we learn to get out of our own way, the connection is there. And you've heard me say this kind of thing when I've done a session with somebody up front, and they're in some very expanded, very pleasant space. And very commonly, I'm sure you've heard this or felt it yourself, and it's like, oh, but how do I hold on to this? Oh, this feels so good. I want to keep this. And you've heard me say variations of this kind of thing. I said, well, think about this. This is after 35 minutes doing a little exploration together. You start experiencing this state, whatever it is. I said, so it's always been there. It didn't take much, really. I mean, of course, they've probably done years of work previous to that too, but still, with a little bit of help, you have access to this state. And I always say, you don't have to hold on to it. It holds on to you, because it's part of who we are. It's just that that is the core dilemma, is that we had, all of us in different ways, had to give up parts of who we are in order to survive. So that creates this very basic dilemma that all of us experience, because we all want to be alive and authentic and connected, and we're all very afraid of that. That was what, as you recall, the original title of the book was, Connection, Our Deepest Desire and Greatest Fear. Because that dynamic, in different ways and in different degrees and in different, dimensions, is such a core struggle I think, for all human beings, as far as I can tell. So it doesn't mean, that we're passive in the NARM therapeutic role. And sometimes we're actively managing. particularly when you've got highly fragmented clients who are going all over the place. We don't just follow them into all of the fragmentations, but we're doing it from a place of awareness and not of efforting. And it takes a certain kind of attention sometimes to stay centered and track all of the different side roads that many clients tend to go down. You know, one association after another, and here, and going back to history, and all of these things, and to see, you know, what is it that's actually trying to emerge in this kind of figure ground dynamic. So.